What's going on, animators? Aaron here from CG Riff, and we're super thrilled to have you all joining us for our season 1 finale of the CG Riff Animation Podcast. And Christmas has come early this year. We've got a living legend in the house, none other than the one and only James Baxter is joining us today. James needs no introduction, but for any of you who've been living under an animation rock, he's been in the industry for 35 plus years, touching so many of the characters that shaped my childhood. Supervising on characters like Belle, Beauty and the Beast, of course, Quasimodo, Sinbad, Spirit. You name it. Goes on and on. Many years at Disney, DreamWorks, and this has led him to his current role as VP of Animation over at Netflix. So we're excited to hear all about his journey and just draw some inspiration from his wealth of wisdom over this many years. Thank you for your time, James. Thanks for being here today, and welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me, Aaron. This is exciting. Thanks.
Cool. So let's jump right into it. We like to start all the way at the beginning whenever we have a guest on, and take us back. Where did you grow up? What role did art kind of play in your early life, and how did you find your way into the world of animation as something you wanted to study and or pursue?
Oh, okay. So I'm from the UK, born in the late 60s. My formative years were definitely sort of late 70s, early 80s, as far as getting into film and stuff like that. So I grew up around London, not in London, but in the sort of commuter belt around London, halfway between London and Cambridge. And yeah, I just started getting really into film primarily in my teenage years. But I was always drawing, and I was a kid that would draw all the time. And so animation just sort of became this thing that I was attracted to because it was drawing, but also film at the same time. I got very into like visual effects stuff when I was a teenager, and would like make models and do sort of visual effects stuff and experiments in my bedroom and make a huge mess. Um, and but eventually, as sort of my late teenage years, I sort of honed in towards actually wanting to try like hand drawn animation at that time. And the UK was I wouldn't really call it a backwater, but it wasn't like Hollywood, as far as like hand drawn animation. And I sort of imagined maybe I could get a job eventually at one of the commercial houses in London, like Richard Williams or Eric Goldberg's place. Something like that would be sort of like if I made it, that would be how that's what that would look like, basically. And then so I started just doing experiments. I think my first experiments was on a Super 8 camera, like on film, on a tripod, pointing at the floor, with like a single frame advance clicker, and I was just doing experiments there like that, and that was kind of magical. Sometimes I get animators or younger animators these days to try animating something and never pressing play. Like
Yeah.
try animate something but never see it move and see how good it turns out. Because that's the way like
Yeah.
everyone had done it for decades and until video, and then ultimately computers came along where you could just kind of just do it and press play and check your work all the time. So yeah, that was my first foray into it. And then from there, I went to school for animation. I went to a place called West Surrey College of Art and Design as my college, but I only went there for 1 year
Hmm.
because Roger Rabbit started in London, basically during my first year of college. And then during the summer holidays, me and about 3 or 4 other folks from that course jumped ship and went to go work on Roger Rabbit. So
Wow.
yeah, and then so I didn't graduate. I didn't go back to college after that. I just started.
So were you just that naturally gifted, or did they teach you that much in 1 year? Or you already came in, I guess, having a kind of a natural talent for this
I mean,
to,
I'd,
to
I'd
to get that
been,
good that fast?
I don't know, I'd been animating a little bits and pieces for a few years, and I started at the bottom like everyone else, doing in betweens and stuff like that. But I was just like crazy eager to soak it up, like a sponge. And it was definitely. I mean, the industry was a lot smaller back then, especially in the UK, and they were struggling to find enough people that could really
Mm.
do it. So it wasn't like it is now, where there's just hundreds and hundreds of people just clamoring for one job these days. So it was very much a kind of a battlefield promotion, I think, because I showed some promise and I was like crazy, super eager, and I would do like my own test. Outside of doing in betweens and stuff, I would do my own animation tests, during my lunch break, and bother the animators for model sheets and stuff like that. And I really, just for those 8 or 9 months, 10 months that I was on Roger Rabbit, I pretty much just ate and slept and drew. And that was pretty much it.
Yeah.
you know,
Wow. Yeah.
like
Had the
like
hunger.
like you
Yeah.
like you do when you're like, what was I? I was like 19, 20 years old.
Yeah, geez. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you basically skipped over most of college and got right into the industry. So yeah, super,
Yeah,
super young. That's that's
yeah.
uh that's awesome. So who were some of the animators you were rubbing shoulders with on that show? I mean, obviously Richard Williams was
Yeah, I mean,
the top, but
Richard Williams was like, directing the animation. So he was animating himself, but he was also in his own office, like as like the top dog in animation. And I had grown up, or rather, when I got into animation and film, he was definitely someone I looked up to a lot. I had seen his work on television with the commercials that he had done, but also in a documentary about the making of The Thief, which was
yeah,
ongoing at that time. But there was a documentary on television that I saw some of the footage from The Thief, and I thought, wow, it's incredible. So I kind of idolized Dick quite a bit. So there was Dick, but also a few animators came over from Hollywood, from Disney, to work in London for that year. Andreas Deja was one of them, and
okay,
I
yeah,
and I got onto his cleanup crew. So I was in betweening for Andreas. He had his key cleanup artist. It was Sue Baker, and there were breakdown artists, and I started working for Sue on Andreas's shots. That's kind of where I started, and so I learned a little bit from Andreas, but not formally, not sort of in a
yeah.
formal mentor type thing, just kind of by osmosis more than anything. just seeing the work in front of you and figuring out what they were doing. My entire learning experience has been very much that. I've never had sort of a proper mentor relationship with anybody. It's always been very like me just looking closely at what they're doing and trying to figure it out.
Yeah, studying
Yeah,
and picking it apart. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Well, but yeah, I mean, but it sounds like you say the majority of your education was on the job
yeah,
anyway. But
for sure.
yeah, just being around those talented people with such on such a kind of lofty project. I mean, that was doing on
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
that on live action plates as your first show. It's like
Yeah,
that's
I
its
was
own type
very,
of thing.
I was
Yeah,
very lucky actually that show came along when it did. But yeah, and it was a very technically demanding project right from the get go. So I learned a lot of very good habits right from the get go, about accuracy and and trying to draw dimensionally and all those kinds of things.
Yeah, well, I mean, in my experience, kind of just stalking you all these years, I've been a super fan for a long time. In my opinion, and I think of many others, you're among the best to ever do it. That dimensionality that you talk about, your ability to keep models on form and spin them in space is unparalleled. In my book, I'm always floored when I see pencil test of Scar walking around old Simba or whatever, or obviously Belle and the Beast
Right.
dancing in the ballroom and these types of things. It's just blow my mind how you're able to keep things on model. The couple of times I've had the opportunity to do 2D animation, we had to do some in college, and my problem, my shortcoming was always that I couldn't keep things on model. My drawings were just constantly swelling and changing shape and kind of goopy and all that. So 3D animation was my saving grace in that way. But yeah, a huge fan of your ability to do that. And to your point, starting on a show like that where you're having to kind of match live action camera moves and whatnot, I'm sure it was a masterclass in kind of getting thrown into the deep end of figuring that out, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. But I mean, I will say that I come from a family of scientists. They were all scientists. Like my dad was an engineer, and my mom taught biology, and
Mm,
my sister was a chemist, and so I think that sort of it's actually the emotional side of animating, the performance, the actor side of it, which I had to learn more. I think the technical side of it came more easily to me because I think that's the way my brain works. So doing things like spinning a form in space, like how to approach that as a just a technical problem, I think I was more suited to like figuring that out. It's not that I draw, any better than anyone else, but I think I figure out how to approach things. It's like, oh, which drawing to do first and which way to line it up so you're referencing the background so you can keep it solid. That kind of thinking through a problem like that. I think initially I was quite good at that part of it. Yeah. And
That's
things like
interesting.
the spacing issue, like knowing how to
Yeah.
control spacing so things flow or not. That was the part which was a little more obvious to me. But it was actually the expressive drawing and the performance and things like that, which is something I still have to like try and do. I have to think about and like really practice and try and get it right. That doesn't come as naturally to me.
Yeah, it's interesting because those are, to your point, such different skills, right? They use such different, parts of the brain and even our kind of backgrounds or things that inform how we approach animation. I come at animation as a performer. I did musical theater growing up and all these types of things. Not much of a draftsman by any stretch. And so, yeah, that's interesting that you would point that out. But I assure you, you're too humble. I think you are a better draftsman than many. I'd argue.
Maybe.
Okay, so Roger Rabbit Raps, you said that was about 9-10 months. What is sort of the next step or progression in your career after that?
Yeah, and then it was like, wow, what am I going to do now? Dick Williams was going to use that as a springboard to try and get his film made, his The Thief made, so that he was trying to get that figured out. So I knew a bunch of people that were going to stay in London and help him try and do that. But then, the Hollywood animators, so Andreas Dejan, Phil Niblink, and Dave Spafford, they were all going back to Hollywood, and they said, well, you should just come out. You should see if you can get a job, at Disney in Burbank. So I did. I just hopped on a plane and came for kind of a vacation visit, basically, and talked to recruiting there. And so they decided to try and hire me in Burbank, and that was Little Mermaid. Yeah,
Okay,
so
so that was your first show at Disney,
started
or
on
Disney proper. Yeah.
started on Little Mermaid. So they were just finishing Oliver and Company when I got there, and started in on Little Mermaid.
Okay, awesome. So this would have been, I guess, what mid '80s, mid to late.
Yeah, that was '88. I got
88,
here like basically the year that Roger Rabbit came out. I came out here, and when I got to, we were in like warehouses like on Flower Street in Glendale. Like there's all these sort of big warehouse buildings, in that neighborhood where DreamWorks is right now. So, but Disney basically owns the whole neighborhood, and like Imagineering is there, and publishing, and so all the animated films I did, at least up until Hunchback, were done in different sort of warehouses in and around Flower Street in Glendale, which was like, Little Mermaid was done in one, and then Rescuers Down Under was done in a different one, and then Beauty and the Beast was done in a different one. So we were just moving around those 2 or 3 blocks of space, going to different places. But when I first got to Disney and I arrived at my cubicle, it had already been decorated by Sean Keller, who's a lovely man. But he's heard that there was this British kid coming, so he decorated my cube with very American things and very British things. So there was like posters of John Wayne and like a pop-up book of Lady Diana and Charles. And like all sorts of weird like red, white, and blue stuff. It was like, what is going on? And who is this person that doesn't know me that decided to decorate my cube? It was a nice welcome, actually. I like Sean. He's a great guy.
And so coming on to Little Mermaid after working on Roger Rabbit, what were kind of the primary differences in terms of you're at a different studio as obviously a fully animated show? Were you animating on that, or were you still, was that in betweening, or what
No,
was your kind of role?
By the end of Roger Rabbit, I was animating. So I came to
Oh wow.
Disney in Burbank as an animator. And because Andreas was the person I knew best, he took me onto his crew to work on King Triton.
Okay.
So I animated a bunch of King Triton shots and the occasional, actually I probably animated about 50-50 now that I think about it, Ariel shots, because she had a lot of footage in the movie. So lots of people would jump onto Ariel. So I did a bunch of Ariel and a bunch of Triton on that movie, and just
Okay.
desperately trying to learn how to be a Disney animator, how to draw Disney characters, you know.
Where I talked to a lot of 2D animators who were I guess coming up around that time, and usually I guess that from the sounds of it, the runway, like the progression of like your cleanup or in between or like rough in between or all these types of things is usually quite long. But it sounds like in one show you kind of blew through all that and found yourself. Yeah. So did you find, I guess, when landing on a show now as a full animator, that there were things you still a lot of things you still had to learn or kind of figure out?
I think I was so glad that I had done the cleanup thing. I was an in-betweener. I was also a key cleanup for a very short period of time for one of the animators on Roger Rabbit. I was very glad that I'd gone through that process, just because it makes you a better animator if you know what you're preparing work for. If you know what the people have to do that follow after you. I think animators that in hand-drawn, at least, that never have to do that, and then actually in CG it's even worse. It's very hard to sort of have any kind of apprentice type position in CG. You're either an animator or you're not. Mm-hmm. It's like you can kind of be a junior animator and get like little, but it's not like there's a job really where you can assist an animator. You know what I mean? So it's like you kind of so it's hard to actually have that apprenticeship in CG, or it's slightly more difficult to have that apprenticeship. Just learning how to do it by treating the work of someone else as it goes through. Mm-hmm. But I still felt like I was learning a lot, not just about like how to animate and how to draw these types of characters, but also kind of the politics of it too. I think I spent the first 5 years or so trying to figure out how to do the teamwork politics stuff. That's probably the hardest part for me, because I just like sitting in my room and drawing and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, plus at this time you're still probably like 20, 21 or something, right?
That's I was super young, and like you don't know what you're doing when you're 22 or whatever. And you make all sorts of like mistakes as far as like who should I be talking to get approval, and things like that.
So after Little Mermaid, was it what, Rescuers next or
yeah, Rescuers Down Under?
Yeah, Down Under. Yeah.
Which was the first movie that was now scanned and painted digitally.
Okay,
so
I didn't realize
Little
that.
Mermaid was the last movie that had production cells on it, and then we switched to the caps system, which didn't really affect my job. Really, we were still animating on paper. It didn't really change anything. But things like video testing were getting better by that stage. I remember on Mermaid, the video testing that we had was on like a VHS tape at the beginning, and it was awful. It was the worst quality, and you could kind of get like a test that kind of made, well, not really. You had to really wait for it to come back on film before you saw it for real. But by Rescuers, then they had 3/4 inch video testing that you could do yourself and test your animation on better quality videotape.
So did that, in what ways did that, I imagine without having to wait for it to come back on film, did that significantly kind of speed up one's workflow, or was it just that you were testing more often because it could come back quicker, or like how do you think that kind of changed quote expectations or anything?
Yeah, I think it's hard to compare, not having a different experience, but I felt like having a method for me to test my animation fairly quickly, so I could like shoot a test within 20 minutes or so and see it. But the rigmarole of actually going to shoot a test meant that you didn't want to do that more than like a couple of times a day, So it's still sort of instilled the discipline of trying to think what it's going to look like before you're still you're not animating by trial and error. You're really trying to figure it out, so that when you do shoot it, it's going to be close to what you imagine it's going to be. Fingers crossed. It's always a surprise, but so I think actually having that limitation, like not being able to see something right away, actually forces you to kind of learn really what what a 24th of a second really feels like, and
Yeah.
what works and what doesn't work, I think you actually learn better and become a more effective animator. The closer you can get to, while you're animating, knowing what it's going to look like when you hit that button. If you can get to a stage where you're pretty confident when you're doing your thing, that when you hit the button, you know pretty well how it's going to look, or roughly. The closer you can get to that, the way more effective you can be as an animator, right? So you're not just sort of doing it as like a series of like, oh, I'll try this, or I'll try that, or I'll try to like guess your way through it.
Cool. So on a show, like Little Mermaid, right, where the characters are quite humanoid for the most part. What's the sort of like, I guess, referencing process like? I imagine on Roger Rabbit, the stuff is very cartoony and sort of out there with the weasels and all that type of stuff. But going to a show that's a little more naturalistic, like Mermaid, um, were you guys relying on reference actors, or like being able to look at things to sort of inform the performance
It
at all, or
it
was
was
it most of it still just kind of coming out of the head?
most of it's coming out of everyone's head. It was very minor. I mean, very occasionally an animator would try and shoot themselves on video. You had to go get a video camera. I mean, nobody, iPhones didn't exist, and no one really had a personal computer. So very occasionally someone would try shooting reference of themselves, but I can't actually put my finger on anyone that did it on Little Mermaid. There was some live action reference footage shot of Ariel for her song, at least, and a couple of other sequences. They shot Sherry Stoner um, doing some of those sequences, and I think Glenn actually used some of that. And you can tell in some of the posing, that has at least some live action sort of informing it. It's just like looking at it on a screen, and then it's not on the paper, it's not on the page. You're not actually tracing over anything, or you're just kind of like looking at it and oh yeah, and then drawing something like that. So there was a little bit of footage shot of Sherry, but it was by no means exhaustive or the whole movie or anything like that. So I don't think there was anything shot on Eric or anybody else. So yeah, everyone was just making it up, which
So to that point, so a lot of times I'll hear people's stories of like, oh, I went to I had to prepare my portfolio to get into CalArts, so I had to do so much life drawing and this and that. It sounds like because of your journey being kind of as direct and quick as it was that something you had done a lot of, like in terms of human anatomy, like life drawing or studying those types of things?
Sure, I had done some life drawing in high school,
Okay.
and they were in Europe they're a little bit better about like getting like models in front of you earlier when you're in art school. So
Mhm.
yeah, I had done quite a bit of life drawing.
Okay.
Probably not enough, but at least some. So yeah, I had a reasonably good handle on basic anatomy at least. Um, and I actually spent a lot of my time early on in my journey of animating and just being fascinated by it, just kind of framing through everything, like on a VCR. Like
Mhm.
VCRs kind of started when I was a kid, and the first time you could actually get a recording in your own home of stuff that you could frame through. Um, and so I spent quite a bit of my teenage years sort of just framing through things, and not just cartoons. I was framing through cartoons, but also just live action as well. Just like, I don't know why, I just found it interesting. Like, what does that walk look like? And I wouldn't make any notes or anything. Just like would just look at it. Like, how does the world move? I just found that interesting. So I'm much better at remembering a movement than I am remembering a design or even a person's face that I meet.
Mm.
I'm usually a little bit, they have to be moving around for me to recognize them from very well. But I'm
That's
actually
funny.
quite good at remembering a piece of movement. Like if I can see a dance step or a gymnastic move or something like that, or dance, I can have a pretty good memory for how it moves and be able to reference it, reproduce it. Yeah.
That's fascinating. I'm hearing so far in your anecdotes that I think you were made to do this. So congratulations on finding the thing that your
I thought
brain
that was
was
lucky, right?
specifically designed to excel at.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's I've never heard someone describe it in that way. But yeah, your ability to remember movements, even being even superior to just visual data in terms of a face or something
I'm actually
is
not very good at
interesting.
recognizing faces. I'm actually not
Yeah,
very
yeah.
good at.
So
I think
that's
my mother has literally there's a medical term for like not being able to recognize people, and she actually has
mm,
it for real. I mean, she doesn't recognize me unless she has some kind of cues, context.
wow.
It's actually a medical condition where you don't recognize
Yeah.
faces, and I think I have a tiny bit of it.
Mm.
I don't recognize people very well from their faces, which is a strange thing for an artist to say. But I'm very good at recognizing how they move.
Motion, yeah, that's well perfect, yeah, for this field, of course. All right, so we're gonna pick up the pace a little bit because somebody with a career as long as yours obviously
Oh
has
yeah, yeah.
we
Okay,
could
let's get
spend
going.
an hour just going through your credits. But so what was your first film where you kind of moved into sort of leadership in terms of like a supervisory role? Was it Beauty and the Beast, or were you
Yes.
doing a little bit of that on Rescuers in terms
No.
of
It was Beauty and
leading
the Beast.
characters? Not yet.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
Beauty
and
and the Beast.
so in I guess what that was your third show there at Disney.
That was, yes, my third show in Burbank. So fourth film altogether. Yeah.
So by your fourth film, you're supervising the main character.
Yeah, I don't know if
That's
that was a mistake or not because I was 23 years old.
that's
So
crazy
I'm
to
not
be.
sure if that was. I'm not sure really if how wise that really was. But again, it was like there was not that many people around that was doing this stuff,
Yeah.
and the way the Belle came to me was Andreas was going to do Belle originally when
Mm,
it was still being directed by the Purdums, by Richard and Jill Purdom, who are
okay.
a London based couple, and they had a version of the film which was a lot more serious. And then Andreas decided, no, I'd rather do Gaston. He looks more interesting. And then Roger Chesson, I think, was going to do Belle after that. But then he quit the studio and went back to Canada. And then Mark Henn was going to do Belle for a hot second. But then he went to Florida because the Florida studio was just
Oh
starting.
yeah.
And they felt
Yeah.
like they wanted to have someone in California. So it was like, okay, well, that's James. You should do it.
Okay. That just fell down the line into your lap.
Yeah.
That's interesting because I know Andreas for his villains work so much.
Yeah.
So picturing him doing Bellas,
Yeah.
like he's just so renowned for the Scar and Jafar and all of them. But
Yeah.
awesome. Okay, so what was that like? You're 23. You're like you say your performance isn't really your strongest or like most comfortable suit, I guess. But obviously Belle has a lot of that. Like what was that?
Yeah.
What were some of the challenges of that?
I was doing I was doing all right. Doing all right with the animation by that point. I felt like I could animate her fine. It was the actual act of supervising I wasn't very good at. So I think she looks rather inconsistent in that film in terms of her model and in terms of her performance. I think largely because I really wasn't very good at leading the way for a bunch of artists yet and figuring out what I needed to do to get everyone on the same page. I was a bit
Oh,
sort of standoffish and afraid to like kind of forge the path forward. I just sort of expected to do a bunch of work and then hopefully everyone would just copy what I was doing rather than being, but no, I'm going to do these model sheets and we're going to talk about it. And this is, so I learned a lot how to do that a lot better over the years. But when you're that young, it's kind of tricky to do that kind of stuff, especially with animators who are like 10 years your senior.
yeah, so much older than you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. It's
Yeah.
hard. It's hard.
Plus, I
So
mean, there's not really, kind of proper or formal education for those types of leadership positions. You just
no,
kind of get them, and then you're like, you figure it
yeah,
out kind of as
yeah.
you're on it.
No, I'm way better at that part of it now. Much better at that.
So let's talk briefly about one of the most iconic scenes, obviously from that film, and one of the first, as I understand, to really fully utilize CG environments, is the ballroom scene, right? Belle and the Beast dancing in Beauty and the Beast song. What was that process like? I feel like that scene is so iconic, and I still look at it now, and the mastery of the, I guess, seamless integration between the 2D and the 3D there is
Hmm.
just a delight to look at, even 30 years later or whatever, right?
Yeah.
How did that what was that process like? What did you guys learn? What were sort of the challenges, and anything you want to kind of say about that?
It was actually very similar to the Roger Rabbit approach, which I had just done. I had done a few movies before. I mean, there had been CG work in like Great Mouse Detective, in The Clock Tower, and in Oliver and Company. There's a set of stairs and some cars and stuff like that. But that stuff was printed out and cell painted, rather than actually being a CG image that was scanned onto film directly. So I think maybe the ballroom was one, or if not, the first actual CG image with the animation on top. But it came to me very much like Roger Rabbit did, just as a series of in this case, wireframe printout on paper, on animation paper. So instead of being photostats, with Bob Hoskins, it was just sheets and sheets of this wireframe ballroom. And the great thing about doing matching computer moves is they're a little bit more predictable than live action camera moves. Live action camera moves can have weird sort of bumps and jiggles and stuff in them that computer moves usually don't. So they're actually more predictable to be able to animate to, because you can almost kind of guess where the in-between is going to be because it's mathematical, almost. So that makes it a little bit easier. But the fact that there's no detail on it, I mean, like the floor of the ballroom and the printouts that I got were just these big squares, on the floor. And if I wanted to plant the beast's foot in the middle of the square, I didn't have anything to attach it to, frame by frame. Like on the live action stats, you would have like little bits of texture or something. Oh, I'll plant the foot on that rock. There's none of that. It was just a wireframe. So I would end up actually subdividing the floor with a pencil and doing like a cross, or like getting my own little more subdivision where I really wanted to place the feet to get them to match better. So yeah, you learn these kind of things. The main thing about doing those kinds of shots, it's the thinking ahead. It's the planning. You have to plan it because you can't fiddle with it later. You have to commit to a frame where this is going to happen, and because you can't really change your timing without redrawing the whole thing.
Yeah.
So you've really got to carefully think it through. Okay, she's going to spin him out this way, and I'll be really like much more than any other shot, just sort of almost with a stopwatch, just kind of like, and with my imagination, like, spin, 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 and then like, okay, that's going to be frame 57. Let's do it. Get frame 57 and just start drawing them in that pose, and then trying to get them in the right position, and then I'll just break it down from these major poses. But you kind of have to commit to those frames, those moments.
So with something like that, did you have any sort of I know I kind of asked about this before with Mermaid, but any sort of, obviously we're dealing with two characters, very different scales, any sort of I guess background in dance, or like was there a specific dance that you knew they needed to be doing, or was that literally just kind of like feeling it out?
I didn't really have much of a background in dance. We did get a couple of dancers in that could do ballroom dancing, and they listened to the music and said, well, that's not a waltz. It's not in 3/4 time. So we can't do the Sleepy Beauty thing, which is a waltz, So I said, well, what is it then? So, it's kind of like a really slow foxtrot, I guess. So I said, well, what does that look like? So they did some of those steps and said, and can you show me some other cool things that you could do in ballroom? So they did some spins, where he lifts his arm up and she goes underneath and spins out and then comes the other way. And, oh, that's really cool. So I videoed them doing that. So I had reference of what those steps kind of look like. And then it was me just sort of like deciding where to put them and like editing, like, what am I going to do? That whole shot is based around that dress wiping the camera. Like, that's the moment I wanted to get. So it's kind of almost working backwards from that moment where he steps in front of her and then her dress goes whoosh across frame. So everything is sort of choreographed to make sure that happens, really.
That's another thing that's impressed me, is I was going to say the cloth, the flowiness of her dress. And I saw another test, I think a pencil test you had done of Giselle from Enchanted, where it's just so much fabric and
Oh, I
bodicing and
know.
stuff that's like bouncing and springing and moving in all these directions, and it just boggles the brain to keep track of all of that stuff over time, over all these frames, and it's just it's masterful. Again, I'm sensing obviously you're very modest, but it's masterful that it holds up to this day, and it just kind of breaks my brain and how you're kind of mathematically figuring out all of those things. And like you say, you can't redo it. You can't really like scrub and time and retime and
Yeah.
change the stuff. It's like you got
Yeah.
you kind of just plan it all out and get it right, and you did. So bravo.
Yeah, the Giselle shot, I had some live action that we shot of Amy Adams doing that, but the dress is very different in live action. So the dress is pretty much just completely made up by me in that shot, that Giselle shot. But yeah, it was very time consuming, just going through those ruffles, kind of almost one layer at a time. Because to animate the whole thing all at once would just be my brain couldn't hold all that. So I would just go through the shot in sort of phases and animate sort of one piece of it at a time.
That's incredible, and yeah, inspiring and super cool. Okay, so Beauty and the Beast. Let's fast forward a bit. So how much? What was your last show at Disney? I know you did Quasi.
So
Rafiki rather first.
Yeah.
Right?
So after Beauty and the Beast, I quit the studio for a year, and
you did. Okay.
And I went back to the UK, and I did some commercials with Passion Pictures when Passion Pictures was just getting started. They're huge now.
Yeah.
They were just getting started back then. So I did some commercials for them for a while, which was really fun. I got to sort of scratch my Richard Williams itch doing commercials in different styles kind of thing, which is what I wanted to do. And then I came back to the US, actually worked at Colossal Pictures in San Francisco for 2 or 3 months, which is when Don Hahn called me about Lion King. So my second stint at Disney is Lion King and Hunchback.
Okay. Yeah. And so then Rafiki, of course, then you did, lots of, I guess, a fair bit of Scar stuff as well on that show, it looked like, right?
Yeah, I would do Scar shots when the Rafiki work ran out.
Okay, yeah. Limited Rafiki.
Yeah.
So, working, I guess, back with Andreas at that point, right? After many years.
Yeah. So that was fun.
Cool. And then supervised on Quasimodo on Hunchback?
Yeah. So that was, Rafiki wasn't really a supervising job because it was really just me. And he's only on screen for 5 minutes, so I pretty much did all of it. So that was really fun for me, actually, just to kind of sit in a room and animate the little silly character. But yeah, Quasimodo was a much bigger thing, and I was much better prepared second time round to do a big main character, supervising wise, better model sheets, better, just better at it.
So yeah, that's a good point. So in terms of over this many shows at this point, you've been a number of shows. How do you think your leadership style had developed? Like what obviously the age component was a little bit more gone by then. I would think. But what do you think were some of the primary ways in which your leadership style had developed?
Well, I think it helped. Obviously the age thing did help. Like being a few years older helped a lot. Getting a little bit more sort of built-in respect because of that. But I think I started to sort of hone in on some of the things which made it work for me, which was making sure that everyone's work remains their own, that they retain artistic ownership of their work. And that's something which I've tried to build on as a supervisor, is that sort of trick of being able to get people to do what you want and to do something that's working for the character. But for it to remain theirs artistically. So that, and what it requires is a lot of preparation on the part of the supervisor. So I think, like half the battle of doing good supervision is actually preparing the animators well enough to do what they do best. So if you haven't like really communicated how this character works, how they think, how they move, all of that stuff, you can't really expect people to read your mind and do something that's going to be appropriate. And like getting if you can do that work up front, get out in front of the rest of the crew and do that sort of defining work of the character and that explanatory work of the character, you can actually rely on most animators to make fairly good choices. It's when they're sort of left in the dark and when they're like not sure who the character is,
Mm.
not sure who they're trying to impersonate as an actor. That's the thing that live action actors never have to really go through, is
Yeah.
this sort of performance as a group. That everyone has to come together and do the same character, do the same person, be the same person. And it's a way, and it's a struggle that we have in character animation, I think, on large films, where characters can become very generic and non-specific because of that approach, because you have to actually get everyone together to be specific about one character, and so it takes defining that character.
So that's an interesting point, and I wonder now, looking back on your career that's been this long, it sounds like, at least in your opinion, that you were perhaps dropped into a leadership role too early in some ways on Bell. When does one know that they're ready for leadership? Like, what do you think is the kind of proper uh, timing for someone to kind of get tapped for those types of roles in terms of any skills they're displaying or any competencies they seem to have a grasp of? How does one know when they're ready to kind of transition into more of a leadership based role?
I don't know if you had this experience in animation, but I did, where as you were getting into it, or maybe just before you got into the business, everyone was amazing, right? Everyone seemed to be amazing, in the industry, right? And then when you got into the industry and the couple of movies that you've been through, you suddenly start to realize, oh, not everyone's amazing. Some people are better than others. So I think maybe there's a point at which you kind of start to go, yeah, I think I would have made that note differently, or I think I would have, yeah, I don't think that was right. I think it should have been done that way. And I think that's, and I suppose if you're a person that has a realistic view of your own abilities, I mean, I suppose some people are going to think that right off the bat, and they're just going to be wrong. But if you've got if you've got a fairly good view of yourself as an artist, it's that sort of moment where you go like, yeah, I think I should actually maybe try, you know, leading something if I've got something to say, at this point. But yeah, I think you do have to sort of try and be realistic about yourself and your own talent, as part of that, which is a hard thing to do
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah, that makes sense, and that's a great point. I mean, yeah, really realistic view of your abilities and your choices
I've
and
I've
whatnot.
always tried to make sure that I just let the work do all my talking for me. I've never ever. I think it's a huge mistake when people try and talk themselves into a position, or just say like, I should be doing this or I should be doing that. I've always just sort of tried to, as much as possible, do work which is kind of unimpeachable, where you kind of go like, yes, obviously. Just make sure the work is there first. So it's just
Yeah,
obvious that you should be doing it, rather than saying, I can do it, I can do it. It's like, well, yeah. Just, I always tried to make the work do the talking first.
okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So Hunchback, was that your last show at Disney of that stint, or
It was my last show at Disney, period. No, I recently did that Once Upon a Studio short, but that was,
I was going to ask
yeah,
about that, and
yeah.
maybe towards the end, we're going kind of chronologically, but I
Yeah, then
enjoyed
I went to
that.
DreamWorks to work on El Dorado, but ended up working on Prince of Egypt when El Dorado got into story problems. So I did some Prince of
Mm,
Egypt stuff and then El Dorado after
okay, okay,
that.
so you were working mostly on Moses,
Yeah,
Prince
so
of
I did
Egypt, or a
did a
little.
couple of
Okay,
sequences of Moses. They just handed me a couple of sequences
okay.
too.
Yeah, we had Brenda Chapman on a couple months back. She was a delight to talk to. We touched on that a little bit. Kind of underrated masterpiece in a lot of ways. But yeah, it's uh, yeah. I remember when I was growing up watching that, and I loved the score and the soundtrack, and all of it came together in such a nice way. But yeah, even looking back now at some of the pencil tests and stuff, it's just really there's a lot of complexity
Yeah, it
on
was
a show like that. I can
challenging
tell.
to draw, and they wanted to do it pretty, grounded in terms of the acting. So a lot of folks were having to kind of dig deep to try and do like, oh wow, we actually have to do something kind of serious, which
Yeah,
is
yeah, it got dark in places.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so then Tulio, I guess,
Hmm.
on El Dorado, and then what was it? What Sinbad, I guess, after that,
Let's see.
or
I
Spirit? I
think
forget.
I can't remember what order it came in. No, yeah, Spirit. It was after El Dorado. Yeah, and that was something that's kind of a career milestone for me. That movie, I think, Spirit.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously you had done some quadrupeds on Lion King, but had other than outside of that, had you done a lot of your horse work is fantastic, but had you done much of that
Not
or?
much. I mean, I'd done occasionally like a little horse in the background, so not, but not doing anything complex, not doing anything that you would really need to understand the animal properly for. And I wanted to do Spirit. I kind of jumped at the chance to do Spirit because I knew that the crew that did Bambi, that part of Disney, were the ones, and it set that crew up to do anything after that
uh,
film. It wasn't Bill Titler and Fred Moore and the Dumbo animators, because Dumbo and Bambi were happening almost simultaneously. It wasn't them that ended up being able to do absolutely anything. It was the Bambi crew.
mm,
It was Milt and Frank and Ollie
okay,
and
yeah,
Mark. It was those animators that went through that boot camp of having
yeah,
to understand an animal properly, and it set them up for the rest of their careers. So they could, and once you've done a deer, you can do a dog, you can do a cat. Once you've done
yeah,
one of them, you can kind of like, how to get into do the others. So doing a horse properly, I sort of jumped at the chance. Like, I want to understand this properly. So I did a good 3 months of just like trying to get to the bottom of the locomotion and the gaits and the anatomy and that stuff, so I could do pretty much animate a horse doing anything out of my head, you know, which was really
yeah. We
really
we
fun.
Kevin O'Hara works over with us, and he's done some quadruped demos and stuff with us, kind of breaking down like the horse gates and all this type of stuff. And yeah, really, really impressive work on that film. Yeah, again, the sense of kind of like presence and dimensionality on a show like that, you could tell you guys really did your homework. That it feels like it's really there, no matter what poses and kind of what the camera's doing and all of that. Yeah, fantastic work. Really, like you say, I mean, that you even look at that as a kind of career milestone
I Yeah,
says something.
it's some of my proudest stuff is when a horse person, someone who's into horses, says how much they like it and that they think we got it, at least in terms of a cartoon. Um,
Yeah,
at
yeah.
least we got
'Cause, I
it.
mean,
We got it right as far as the horse stuff goes.
yeah, you're gonna see all the canters and the trots and like yeah, there's just so much to it, and yeah, it holds up, so that's awesome. So at what point in your career, because around this time, right, DreamWorks is starting to transition kind of more into 3D. That wave is coming.
Mm-hmm.
What was your first kind of transition into that world, or were you able to kind of hold on to 2D? I know, like in Kung Fu Panda and some of those things you were doing more like 2D things
Right.
for those shows. But what was that transition?
My
Um,
first CG movie was Shrek 2. I had
okay.
been up to PDI while they were making the first Shrek, and just I did some like animation lectures and stuff up there, but I hadn't actually tried my hand at it until Shrek 2. And Shrek 2 was a movie where they wanted to do a little. It was mostly done up north in the Bay Area at PDI, but we had a small crew down here in Burbank, and so in Glendale. So it was me and maybe a dozen other animators kind of went up to the Bay Area to do a little couple of weeks of like how to be a CG animator. So it was interesting. I felt like the transition wasn't too hard as far as just the fact that most of us already knew how to animate well made it a lot easier, because you're not trying to learn how to animate, you're just trying to learn how to use a new tool. You're not trying to learn how to do the animation. You can just teach me which buttons to push to access the control, how to set a key, how to do this, how to access the controls, how to just teach me how to do that. I think the hardest part was actually having the freedom taken away of certain things, because when you hand draw something, you kind of can kind of do whatever you can draw basically. And at least at that stage of CG, the rigs weren't as robust as they are now.
Mhm.
Things would break on you a lot. Geometry would candy wrap on you, like almost, at the drop of a hat. They were touchy. The rigs were touchy,
Yeah.
and not being able to do things like cloth and hair and stuff, which I enjoyed doing as a hand drawn animator. Having that sort of like be unavailable, that was probably the challenge for me. It's like, how can I do something that is appealing when I'm not really in charge of how it looks.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, like
That's interesting.
I have a model now in front of me, and I can only do so much with it because, you know, it is what it is. So yeah, that took a while, and I actually became disenchanted with it after a couple of movies. I did that. I did in Madagascar, which was better. It was much more appealing, but still, I felt like, oh, I can't do what I want to do. You know,
Yeah.
the medium isn't there yet for me to be able to pretty much do what you want to do.
Hmm.
And I went away, did my own studio for 3 years, did Enchanted and Kung Fu Panda stuff at my own small studio. Then came back to CG around the time of like How to Train Your Dragon. At which point the technology and the rigs were just a lot better, and you could get much
Yeah.
closer to what you wanted to achieve, right, without the frustrations of
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
it.
So what was that that transition like, running your own studio was, I mean, because that's now you're kind of a
Yeah,
businessman, and
yeah, I
and all
know
that. Like, was that?
that was interesting. That was we started that really because I felt like I kind of wasn't done with doing hand drawn. I felt like was just kind of hitting it as far as like what I could do. So I just sort of started it out of the blue. Like, I don't know, maybe this will work, maybe this won't. We'll see. Um, and I managed to get you know, some commercials to do, and did the Enchanted thing, which was a blessing for us because that was just really fun to do. Real sort of high level hand drawn stuff in that was real good to do. We only did it. This was me and my wife ran the studio together. We only did it for 3 years because we were like, you know, our kids were like 5 and 7, I think, at the time, and it's like we were just not seeing them. And you
Yeah.
feel like this is ridiculous. Like when you start an adventure like that, it's like it's just so all consuming, you know. And there was a point at which we go like, this is not good for our children or us, frankly, and we need to like
Yeah.
step back. So we did it for 3 years. I was very proud of what we did. We learned a lot. I learned so much about everything that's not animating,
Hmm.
all the rest of it.
Yeah.
You know how to, and I came out of it actually being a better employee, having been an employer for a while.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So after that, I was much better as an employee, I think.
Wow. Okay. And I imagine a lot of the stuff you learned from that sort of helped set you up even for your current position
Yeah,
over at Netflix.
for
But
sure.
we'll get to that in a sec. So after you closed the studio, did you go? You went back to DreamWorks, or
Yeah,
what
went
was
back to
the?
DreamWorks and just
Okay.
spent longer there than I had been anywhere. So did a
Oh
lot of
wow. Okay.
did a lot of CG movies there.
And so, did you find over time that I think I know the answer to this, but did you find at all that CG won out, or had any sort of place in your heart, or is hand drawn still kind of your first love, or like your preference in terms
Yeah,
of?
I mean it's my first love. It's a little like playing a classical instrument, right? It's like
Mm,
playing an acoustic guitar or something. Like
yeah.
doing hand drawn for me, uh, instead of like maybe playing a synthesizer or something. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah.
it's very tactile. You get to do it with your fingers. You know, it's like it's that. So um, I do enjoy that part of doing hand drawn a lot, and the freedom that you get to explore and do things like that. But I also really do enjoy some of the richness and nuance you can get out of CG, which is very hard to do in
Hmm.
hand drawn. I mean, you could do subtle things in hand drawn, but not to the degree that you can do them in
Yeah.
CG, right? And you end up doing types of acting and types of layering and richness to a performance in terms of its detail um, that you have to do in much more direct ways in hand drawn. And I really like the ability to be able to do that in
Hmm.
CG. It's you know, if the art direction is nice and it fits with the motion, of course. But um, yeah, I love being able to do that kind of rich, you know,
Yeah.
layered approach to
Yeah.
acting, you know, in CG. I had fun doing Hiccup's mom
Yeah.
in the second How to Train Your Dragon movie. That was sort of as close as I got to like trying to actually do a real honest performance. You know, like
I know
that.
you had that the kiss shot of her, and
Yeah, that whole
the
sequence
dad,
actually,
like the tender moment.
that whole
Yeah.
sequence of him walking up to her. Christoph is doing Stoic and I'm doing her, and yeah, that whole sequence was fun to do because of that.
Awesome. So looking back now, having done a fair bit of both, what is something that because I have students ask me all the time or whatever, like, oh, do you need to know how to draw to do animation? To do computer animation. Obviously, they're talking about. What
Mhm.
is something that you wish that people who only do or know CG animation understood better? What is something that you feel like you see people get wrong most often, I guess, in CG that don't have that background?
I wouldn't call it wrong, but what I would encourage, I think, young animators to think about that are just getting into CG and they don't draw per se, and it's true, you don't need to know how to draw to be a great animator. I know lots of great animators that don't draw, but you do need to know how to tell stories with pictures. You need to be able to do that. However you create those pictures, is up for grabs. But what I would encourage them all to do is try to make sure that they're not just basing their animation on other animation, that they are looking to life, they're looking to inside themselves and like expressing themselves, not just, oh, this is how animation works because I saw it in this animated movie. To try and get them to examine movement and expression and acting and performance and things in a broader way, because our art is always about, all artists over the centuries have worked this way. It's always what you take into yourself, synthesize within yourself, and spit it out again. Nobody works in a vacuum. No, the most original Picasso, whatever, the most original artist you can think of, original, is still just inputs that he has
Yeah.
synthesized and is spitting out again. So if all you're inputting into yourself is like, Disney cartoons from 1999 to 2005, if that's then it's just going to kind of be too self-referential and just become sort of just a mannered version of itself rather than, what it could be, like a broader, kind of approach to the art form.
That's good. Yeah, that's really good. And even the thing you pointed out before, where you said you used to kind of frame by frame on the VHS of the VCR, even live action
Yeah,
stuff.
everything.
You weren't just like
Oh
watching
yeah,
animation and
I would
like, oh,
do
I'm gonna
just.
copy.
I would look at explosions and like anything that moved. Just like
Yeah,
look at it all.
that's really good.
Yeah.
That's good. Okay, I like that. Okay, so what was your transition out of DreamWorks? So you went and spent a long time there that
Mm-hmm.
time, right? What was your last show there, and what was the transition away from there like?
I had been working on a few shows. I think Cruise 2 was kind of just ramping up by the time, and there was a part where I had worked on two or three things which kind of didn't make it to screen, and I
Mm.
was feeling like, oh, I think I'm kind of running dry. I'm kind of getting worn out by like working on movies which are not getting made. So I just kind of without really much of a plan, decided to step away, and I just spent a year at Sony, doing stuff in development and design, down in Culver City, and then the Netflix thing came up, and that's when I went to Netflix about 5 years ago.
Okay. So yeah, because I saw on your IMDb that you have a character designer credit on a number of the shows that you've worked on through the years too. Is that correct? That
Yeah,
you actually designed some of the
occasionally I
characters,
would
or
get a credit. Yeah.
okay. Okay, that's good. And so I guess oh, the other thing that popped in my head as you were saying that I wanted to ask was did you get to work some on Me and My Shadow when that was in development? Because I know that had a strong 2D element to
Yeah,
it.
I got to do one shot
Okay.
in the movie, before that got canceled. Yeah, that was definitely one on the list of like, oh man, this was
Yeah, a
going to be
few.
so
Yeah.
great. It was going to be so great. That film was going to be so great.
Yeah, the couple of things that I had seen, or I don't remember if they leaked or what online, but
Yeah,
yeah, it looked like it was going to be a cool
I think
project.
they
But
just panicked
yeah.
because it was basically a rom-com,
Mm.
and I think they just kind of like panicked, like, can we do a rom-com? You can't do a rom-com for like a kids animated movie. It's like, of course you can. No, it was going to be great. It was going to be awesome.
So, so you transitioned then up to Netflix, and what can you tell us a little bit more about your position there? What I mean, your title, I guess, is VP Animation, but what does that entail, and what does that the day to day kind of look like?
Yeah, that sounds like I control everything at Netflix, which I don't. I actually, I run a small team of animators who help every director that comes into the studio. We help them all basically in pre-production and in development, kind of getting their characters up and running. So we'll get models and we'll rig them, and we'll either do performance tests or just early development tests, proof of concept kind of stuff. And sometimes we'll do hand-drawn tests, like you do, kind of quickly prove out a character design or a concept before it moves off into CG. So we'll do a lot of that preparatory work with the directors on their movies. Then we'll also work with the partner studios like ImageWorks or Mikros or DNEG that's actually animating the thing. So we'll check in with them. We'll do master classes for them. We'll do all sorts of things to help them, or basically help our directors get the animation that they want. So yeah, we're sort of the small but mighty animation presence at the studio.
That's cool. I imagine getting to touch and affect so many different films and different styles with different filmmakers is exciting and rewarding. Kind of keeps it fresh in terms of you spoke about before liking that kind of Richard Williams to touch doing the commercial work in the UK, getting to touch a lot of styles and things in kind of quick succession. So it's kind of maybe scratching some of that itch.
Yeah, I mean that's the fun part of doing it. It also makes it chaotic as hell, but it's fun. Jumping into different styles, different directors' visions. That's and especially being on the early stages of something where everything's up for grabs is always fun to do.
Yeah. Cool. So you mentioned it briefly before, but I did want to ask you about it because I saw it recently and was touched by it. It tied so much of my childhood into 6 minutes or whatever it was. How were you? How did it come about that you were involved with Once Upon a Studio? I read the credits, and there's so many of you guys that they got back to touch some of that. What was your involvement, and how did that come about?
They reached out to me. I forget who actually made the first contact. It might have actually been Howard Green. I can't remember. But Disney reached out to me to see if it was even a possibility, because they were trying to get some of the animators back to do some of their characters. I had to get it sounded awesome, so I had to get like special permission from Netflix from their legal department. Like, yes, he can work on it, but only like nights and weekends. So sorted that out legally. Netflix was very nice about it. I explained what it was, and it was just this special little thing. So yeah, they brought me back so I could do like Belle and the Beast and Quasimodo and Rafiki, and then they also wanted me to do the Peter Pan shot where they're flying through the studio with Peter, Wendy, and John and Michael. But then I kind of said to them like, "Hey, sure, yeah, I'll do Peter Pan for you. Can I do Bambi?" Because I really want to do Bambi. Yeah, so I said, "Oh, okay, yeah, all right." So yeah, I didn't really hold Peter Pan to ransom, but almost. Because I just really...
So I take it just based on the things you've said tonight and some other things I've heard online. Does Bambi holds a special place in your heart?
Yeah, I think when people ask me what my favorite Disney movie is, I usually say that one. And I do like it as a film. It's poetic and it's beautiful. It's obviously very much of its time. In that sort of sweetness and in the innocence that it has. But there's other reasons why I like it. I like it because if you think about it, it's really only 12, 13 years that separates Steamboat Willie from Bambi. And if you think about that, it kind of blows your mind. That they basically invented the craft of hand-drawn animation within those dozen years. Like pretty much all of it. Like, I mean, yes, we've got more bells and whistles and stuff, but the ability to do convincing acting and convincing motion and well observed and all the things that we do as animators, that's done by the time you get to Bambi. Basically, I mean, like I said, there's been like little things here and there, right? But so it's such an impressive feat in terms of its artistry that's why I kind of like it a lot too.
Awesome. Yeah, I had seen a thumper test that you did while you were on Roger Rabbit, I believe.
Yeah, that was
that got you kind of noticed
that was the test that they made me start animating. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so there's a through line here.
Yeah, there awesome. Definitely is a through line. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. That's awesome. So that's cool. I didn't realize you got to touch that many characters on that short. I assumed that would probably Belle and the Beast and Rafiki. Cool. So
Yeah.
when I go back and watch it again, I'll look out for those
Yes, I
moments
did
and watch it.
Bambi, Thumper, and Flower, and my wife got to work with me on it too, doing all the cleanup, which was really fun for us to do together again. That was great.
Okay, I didn't get into your personal life at all. You
Yeah,
mentioned her before, but so she's in the industry as
yeah,
well.
yeah. So we
She's
met actually
okay.
on Hunchback.
Okay,
She was doing cleanup on Hunchback,
awesome.
and then yeah, like I said, we ran the studio together. But when I get to do hand drawn occasionally, which I still do, sometimes I'll even pick up a little thing on a movie, or like I'll do 2 shots on a movie somewhere. Um, uh, yeah, Kendra will often help me doing follow up and doing cleanup.
Okay,
Yeah,
awesome. Awesome. Yeah, we had Zach Parrish on, number of months ago. I think it was episode number 2. But he was talking about how much he wanted to jump in and do some shots on Sea Beast, but because of the vendor client relationship or whatever with
yeah.
Imageworks, he wasn't able
There's
to
two.
get in there and actually get on the box. But
Yeah,
yeah, that's I know sometimes you're thirsty to say, oh,
yeah,
that looks
and
awesome. I
that's
want to do some of that.
whatever I do, whatever position I end up. I always try to at least carve out some time where I can animate something, because I
Okay,
think it's
good.
it's the
Yeah,
thing it gives me the most joy actually, is just to sit and animate something. So I think if I
yeah.
don't get to animate things in as part of my job, then that's not for me.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. That makes sense. And we're glad that you're still, keeping fresh and getting to touch things. It's always, like I say, that short was special because I know that a lot of the hands who would, and even the voices, who had created those characters, that they brought them all back in that special way. So that was really neat,
Yeah,
to kind of get that tactile hand stuff in there alongside all of, the kind of sleek
yeah,
CG stuff that we're
yeah.
also
It
used
was
to
fun.
now. So that's really cool. Okay, so again, thank you so much for your time. We're kind of coming to the end of our time here. I won't hold you much longer, but I did have a couple kind of just almost like hypothetical questions to close on. What excites you most about the future of the industry? You've been around a long time. You've seen it probably change in some significant ways. Are there things that still excite you about kind of the trajectory or where you'd like to see things go?
Um, the best stuff that we're seeing now, it's filmmaking in a different style. Something like the new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that came out, I think is incredible. It's seeing filmmakers explore style in animation in terms of how they tell a story, um, but also visually too, stylistically, visually. Like the sort of Pandora's box is open now. Like in CG at least,
Hmm.
it's like you can, if you want to, do any style that you wish. You're not bound to a specific look in CG. You kind of have to bully it a little bit to make it do it, but you can do it, and I think
Yeah.
that's really interesting. And then seeing movies from different kinds of voices in animation, voices that we haven't heard before. In terms of filmmakers, I think it's also the other really exciting thing that's happening right now.
That's good. That's good. I really liked. I don't know if it's before you came there or during your time at Netflix, but the stuff that Sergio's team did with Klaus was really interesting. The way they melded kind of 2D
Yeah,
and kind of with the sort of 3D look. You see so much 3D trying to look 2D now, and now you see some 2D trying to look 3D, and
I
it's
know.
like
It's like
it's really neat.
it's
Yeah.
almost like you don't have to choose what your technique is. You basically just have to choose what you want it to look and feel like, and then
Hmm.
reverse engineer how to make it.
Yeah. That's exciting. Uh, okay, so this is just kind of another sort of hypothetical one, as we wrap up. Obviously, like I said, in my opinion, it sounds like the things that you've communicated, like you were made to do this. You're you've had much success at it, and I think you're like I say, among one of the best to do it ever, if I'm honest. But I think a lot of times it's fun to just kind of look back and see, maybe had you not found your way to animation, what's something else that you could have seen yourself doing with life and enjoying?
I don't know, but like I said earlier on, I do come from a family of scientists, and
Mm.
where my family does art as a hobby, they all of them do art as a hobby. I've always felt like I kind of do science as a hobby. So
Mm.
I read like books about evolutionary biology and stuff like that. So
Okay,
I think
awesome.
I would actually really enjoy being like a paleontologist or something like that.
Wow,
I
yeah,
would
yeah,
love to go
that's fun.
dig up dinosaurs and stuff.
Cool, cool. I'm married to a chemist myself, so I have the science side around me
Yeah.
as well. But interesting. Okay, awesome. Let's see. I think that's mostly it. Just the last thing just love to hear is looking forward, right? Hopefully you've still got some years in you if you choose to stick around, and we hope you do. Are there any other career aspirations, any other itches you haven't scratched? The types of films you would love to work on or make, or do you have directing aspirations, anything like that? On the horizon.
I could see myself directing at some stage. I feel like I would need to partner with someone. I'd like to co-direct, I think, if I was going to direct.
Yeah.
I would. I also would like to finish a short film. That would be really fun to do. I think I would. I mean, I've had a couple of things sort of on the back burner for many years, but finding time to do these things is always hard when you're a professional animator. So I would love to find the time to actually. Maybe I should do what my friend Ming-Q did and just take a year off and just make it. But yeah, I'd love to be able to do that for sure.
Awesome. And I assume if you did a short, it would be in 2D.
I think definitely. Yeah. Why not?
That's fair. Yeah. Cool. Awesome. Well, James, thank you so much. This has been absolutely fantastic. It's my like, I secretly do these podcasts just for myself. I love just getting to sit down and pick the brains of these people I respect and look up to so much. Such an inspiring story and journey. Your command of the craft is so inspiring in and of itself. And like you mentioned before, letting the work speak for itself, it does, and very loudly. And I know you've inspired generations of those coming up behind you. And thank you for your time, kind of sharing your brain and your heart with us tonight. Are there any final words of advice, encouragement you have to offer to the listeners maybe out there? Maybe someone who's just getting started and thinking about pursuing the industry, or maybe as you're early, you're kind of, sometimes it's easy to get discouraged and whatnot. But as someone looking back with all of this wisdom you've acquired, are there any kind of final parting words you'd like to leave with the viewers?
I don't know. It's just that if you love this thing, because you would kind of do it for free. If if you couldn't find a job to do it, you would do it anyway. If you feel that way about animation, then you're going to be fine. If if you have this, like, I just have to do it, I don't care if I actually get a job at it or not. If you feel that way about it, you probably will get a job doing it. So it's just keep the passion alive. That's what I would say. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Aaron, so much for inviting me to do your podcast. It's been great.
Yeah, it's our absolute pleasure having you. Thanks to all of you for tuning in. This is, like I said, the season finale. It's been our joy bringing you guys these conversations throughout the year. We're going to take a little bit of a break, and we'll be back in the new year. If you haven't caught the previous episodes, if you're not current, go back and check those out. We're on YouTube and Spotify now. So some good listening to throw on for inspiration while you're polishing your shot or whatever you're working on. Thanks again to Mr. James Baxter and to all our guests this season. Thank you all for tuning in and listening. Be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss our future drops. We've got a lot of episodes planned in 2024. And thank you all, and we'll see you next time. Bye.